Grab a seat, hold my beer, and brace yourself for the worst torture methods in human history. Blood Eagle. The Vikings had this execution method that makes Game of Thrones look like a Disney movie. They laid the poor soul down on a makeshift table. The executioner plays surgeon and carves open the poor guy's back as if he's trying to find the lost TV remote in there. Ribs exposed, but no barbecue sauce in sight, unfortunately. They do this cool trick where they peel the ribs away but don't completely sever them. Now, here's where it gets real creepy carnival. They reach into the guy's chest cavity, pull out the lungs, and spread them out like wings. You bet there was some serious agony going on. The poor guy, with his back wide open and lungs on display, would die with unimaginable pain after a few minutes. Once the gruesome procedure was completed, the condemned individual's body was not simply discarded. They would tie the hands of the body with ropes and hang the body for display. Apparently, this was the VIP treatment, reserved for the nastiest enemies or those who forgot to return borrowed Viking DVDs. Nah, just kidding. Now here comes the next brutal torture method. Pear of Anguish. The Pear of Anguish is a historical instrument of torture that was used during the Middle Ages and later periods in Europe to extract confessions from criminals. This device typically consisted of a metal body shaped like a pear, with segments with a bulbous head on one end and a narrower stem on the other, and attached to the stem is a screw. The head of the pear could be spread apart by turning the screw. Imagine a lump of cold metal being slowly forced into Uranus. Not this one, but in Uranus. The torturer now asks for information, a confession, whatever it is he wants to get out of you. You see, as he turns the screw slowly, and slowly, the head of the pear begins to expand. The metal presses against the walls of your rectum. The pressure begins to build and it feels like the metal is going to rip through the delicate tissue. And in fact, it might if you don't start enjoying it. The pear is meant to stretch the anus as far as possible. Its consequences included severe injuries, infections due to unsanitary conditions, profound psychological trauma, and, in extreme cases, death. The device came in different sizes and shapes, allowing it to be used in the mouth, anus, or vagina, depending on the perceived offense. The next torture method is even crazier. Scaphism. So, back in the day, the Persians had this thing where they'd execute people by trapping them between two boats. Okay, picture this. They'd force the poor soul to gulp down a nasty mix of milk and honey. Not the worst part yet though. After that, they'd stick the person between these two boats in a swampy river, leaving only their head, hands, and feet exposed. Now, here's where it gets downright gruesome. They'd keep feeding the person more milk and honey to keep them alive, and more honey was smeared on their body. But it wasn't out of kindness, no way. The whole point was to attract insects, especially flies, which would feed on the person's exposed flesh. The victim's body would become a breeding ground for maggots. It's beyond disgusting. The milk and honey diet was basically a twisted attempt to prolong the person's suffering. As time passed, the person would suffer from dehydration, malnutrition, and insect bites, leading to a slow and painful death. It could take several days for the person to die in this extremely cruel and inhumane way. Brazen Bull. The brazen bull was a gruesome ancient Greek execution device designed for torture around 570 BCE. The bull was made of bronze and shaped like a life-sized bull. The condemned person was placed inside the bull, and the opening sealed. A fire was then lit underneath the bull, and the metal would get hotter than Zeus in a sauna. As the metal heated, the person inside would slowly roast, turning the person into a human kebab. The cramped area transformed into a horrible chamber of excruciating pain as the temperature increased. The victim's flesh would sizzle when it came into contact with the searing metal, causing severe burns. The screams of the victim would come through pipes inside the bull that had been intentionally twisted, turning the screams into a real bull's cry. Through holes in the bull's nose, the smoke would escape, but the nose was full of incense to decrease the smell of the burning bodies. In their last moments, the individual would likely succumb to a combination of severe burns, heat stroke, and ultimately death. To make matters even more sadistic, a system of pulleys and levers allowed the torturers to open a trapdoor on the bull's side and remove the charred remains of the victim once they were dead. So here comes the last one. The rack torture. The rack, also known as the stretching rack or simply the tormentor, was a prominent feature in medieval European dungeons and torture chambers. Its design typically consisted of a rectangular wooden frame with a roller at each end. The victim, often bound and restrained, would be positioned horizontally on the rack. The ankles were fastened to one roller and the wrist to the other, leaving the person suspended and vulnerable. The executioner, or the torturer, would then turn a handle connected to one of the rollers. As the handle turned, the rollers rotated, causing the ropes or chains connected to the limbs to wind and gradually increase tension. The result was a horrifying process of stretching the individual's body in opposite directions. It's aimed to systematically dislocate joints, tear muscles, and strain ligaments, leading to excruciating and lasting agony. Well, congratulations, you've just taken a dark and twisted journey through some of the most horrifying torture methods in human history. See you in the next video.